Did Kane send you to watch me die? Or to help it happen?
He sent me to watch. I decided the rest myself.
3 weeks earlier, they told her the Alpha was broken. Something had shattered inside Callamash Vale the night his wolf bond collapsed, severed at the root. No medicine could fix it. He stopped coming to pack gatherings, stopped sitting at the Elder Council's table. He ran the northern border alone before dawn, and the wolves sent to check on him came back silent, eyes down, reports vague. 2 women had been sent to him before her. Offerings from Silvermark. Neither lasted a week. Mara Voss pressed her nails into her palms as the tree line thinned and the northern lodge rose against a pewter sky. She'd been raised to be useful, not sacrificial, to read a room before she entered it. To solve problems so quietly the person whose problem she'd solved forgot there'd ever been one. But Elder Kane had smiled when he gave her this assignment, and smiles from Kane always meant something was being taken. She braced for what everyone promised she'd find. The musk of a wolf, untethered from reason. The growl of an animal that no longer knew the difference between threat and guest. She crossed the threshold and found nothing. No aggression. No feral heat baking off the walls. The lodge was immaculate. Dark timber, cold stone, a low fire, pine resin and wood smoke. And underneath it all, something unexpectedly clean. Only silence. The controlled quiet of someone who'd been waiting. You can come in fully, a voice said from across the room, low, unhurried, or you can leave. I won't stop you either way. Mara let the door close behind her. The Alpha stepped from the shadows, and every picture she'd been given of him collapsed on contact with reality. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like every territorial Alpha. But he moved with the deliberate ill-economy of someone managing something. A tension along his left side he refused to show. A wolf that had learned to carry pain without advertising it. She noticed it because she'd spent years noticing what other people decided not to see. His eyes stopped her, not the blown-out amber of a feral wolf mid-spiral, dark, clear, moving over her face with an attention so precise it felt less like being looked at and more like being read. I didn't ask for a visitor, he said. I was told you'd made a request, Mara said. Through Elder Kane. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise. Something older, colder. Kane told you I asked for you. He told me you needed someone, Mara said, that your condition was progressing, that you required a stabilizing presence. Callum's jaw tightened, released. Kane is a man who moves pieces on a board and calls it leadership. If he told you I requested this, he wanted you here for reasons that have nothing to do with me. Mara's hands curled at her sides. She'd suspected Kane of calculation before, redirecting credit, reframing failures, positioning himself at the center of outcomes he'd barely touched. But this was different. A man in a remote lodge, blindsided by her arrival, looking at her like he recognized a pattern he'd hoped never to see again. Then why am I here? She asked, hating how young she sounded. Callum studied her. When he spoke, it was without cruelty, which somehow landed harder. Because you were convenient, he said. Whatever Kane needed removed from Silvermark, sending it north was tidier than dealing with it himself. The room tilted. She'd known. In the way you know things you haven't let yourself think, that this was a disposal, that the language of service and duty was a frame built around something that didn't deserve one. But hearing it stated plainly, without ceremony, that she wasn't a gesture of goodwill but a problem, redirected. It landed harder than she'd braced for. Sit down, Callum said quietly. Before you make a decision you haven't finished thinking through. Mara wanted to refuse. Her knees sat down anyway. What happens now? She managed. Callum sat across from her with careful precision. The way people sit when one position hurts less than another, and they've stopped drawing attention to it. That depends on what you were told to do here. Provide presence, steadiness, observe whether your condition was progressing. And if it was, she held his gaze, bear witness, let things take their natural course. Silence, absolute. Callum didn't rage, didn't pace. He went still, the stillness of someone hearing a confirmation he'd already suspected and hoped despite everything, was wrong. "He wants me gone," he said, flat, precise as a blade on a table, "and he sent you to make sure no one interfered." "Yes, but you came anyway. I had no choice. There is always a choice." "Not," Mara said, her voice finding its edge. "When refusal means my brother loses his rank, my mother loses her healing rights, and Kane gets to write the story of why." Something moved through Callum's expression. Not pity. She'd have shut this down immediately if it were pity. Recognition. The understanding of someone who also knows what it's like to have leverage held over them by a man who smiles while he holds it. He nodded slowly. "Then we're in an unusual position," he said. "You were sent to witness my decline. I have no intention of providing one." He paused, which leaves the question of what we do about it. Mara looked at him, really looked. A man the pack had reduced to a warning, a cautionary rumor, a problem quietly relocated to the edge of the map. Labeled feral when everything in front of her said otherwise. 8 months alone in this lodge, and no one had asked what was actually happening to him. She made a decision. "I stay," she said, "not for Kane, for myself." Callum's eyes sharpened. "Explain. If I go back, I return to a pack that just used me as a disposal mechanism, and will smile at my face tomorrow morning. If I stay, at least it's my choice." She met his gaze. "And I'm very good at seeing things people have decided not to look at. Whatever's happening with you, I want to understand it. Not manage it, understand it." Callum was quiet. She could feel him weighing it. Not whether to trust her, whether she was what she appeared to be. A different question. A more careful one. "You may stay," he said finally, "but understand this." His voice was level. "I will not use you the way Kane did. You are not a resource to be deployed." Mara's chest tightened. When was the last time someone named what was being done to her and refused to do it? "Then what am I?" she asked softly. Callum moved to the window. Outside, the Northern Territory stretched in every direction. Dark pines, frost-pale ground, a horizon that belonged to no one. "You weren't sent here for me," he said, "but perhaps you were meant to arrive anyway." Mara said nothing, and in that cold lodge at the edge of Silvermark's reach, something began that no one who sent her here had planned for. 3 weeks earlier, Mara Voss believed she understood her place in Silvermark. She sat in the strategy room before dawn, hands moving across territorial maps. The room smelled of pine resin, old ink, and the staleness of decisions that affected other people's lives. Around her, the evidence of her usefulness. Patrol routes she'd restructured after enforcers missed the same blind corridor for 6 months straight. A border dispute with Thornfield, resolved without a single wolf shifting. A trade agreement with Greywood, presented to the council in Kane's name, with his signature at the bottom. She'd drafted every line. She hadn't expected credit. She'd stopped expecting it years ago. Credit required someone to notice the gap between what they could do and what was actually getting done. Kane had never cared about that math. He cared about outcomes. Mara produced them. For 4 years, that arrangement had worked well enough that she'd convinced herself it was sustainable, 23 years old. And she'd already perfected the art of making powerful men look competent. She told herself this was a skill. She was still telling herself that when Elder Kane walked in, no knock, no announcement. The complete ease of a man who had never once wondered if he was welcome in a room. He sat at the head of the table without invitation. "The Ashfield situation," he said. "I need it handled." Mara set down her pen. She'd learned that the word handled meant pay attention to everything he's not saying. Handled how? Callum Ashvale has been isolated in the Northern Territory for 8 months. Kane folded his hands with the patience of a man who'd already decided how this conversation ends. His instability is a reputational liability. Alliance talks with Fernwood have stalled twice. 3 bond matches have withdrawn. The council is concerned. "The council," Mara said carefully. "Or you. When I'm concerned, the council is concerned. You know how this works." She did. That was the problem. What does handling it look like? He needs a stabilizing presence. Someone to observe the progression of his condition and report back with clarity. A pause. Someone discreet. Mara went very still. You want to send me to him? I want you to help him, Kane said. The correction so smooth it almost sounded genuine. Comfort. Presence. A steady point of contact between his territory and pack leadership. And if his condition is progressing, then we need accurate information. We cannot force recovery on a wolf who's lost his anchor. All we can do is bear witness to the process. Bear witness to the process. Mara had heard that phrase before. At her grandmother's bedside, when the healers ran out of options. At the Greywood border dispute, when intervening cost more than it gained. It meant, do nothing. It meant, let it finish. He's 29 years old. Mara said, he is a wolf whose bond has been destabilized for 8 months with no sign of recovery. Kane's patience was of a man explaining something to someone being deliberately slow. You're not being asked to make decisions about his condition. You're being asked to be present for whatever comes next. Surely that's not so terrible. What does his territory look like? Remote, functional. He maintains the lodge and the patrols. He hasn't harmed anyone, a beat, yet. The word sat in the air like a stone dropped in still water, and if I refuse, the temperature in the room didn't change. But something in Kane's stillness did. A door closing quietly in a house you thought was empty. Your brother Reed holds a trainee position in Northern Enforcement, he said. Mild, conversational, without heat. That position depends on his family's standing. And your mother's healing rights, her access to the pack's medical stores, those are extended privileges, not guaranteed. A pause. I'd hate for a refusal here to introduce complications for either of them. Mara's hands were flat on the table. She pressed them down, felt the grain of the wood, and focused on that. Something solid, something external. She'd known this moment would come. 4 years of making herself indispensable to a man who saw people as instruments. It would eventually produce exactly this. The moment the instrument got picked up and pointed at something it would never have chosen, she'd made herself too useful to refuse, and too replaceable to negotiate with. She looked at Elder Kane, the man she'd made look visionary in front of 3 delegations, whose reputation rested on her thinking, who'd taken her labor for 4 years without once considering she had a self beyond what she provided. She understood, with quiet finality. She had never been a strategist to him. She'd been a tool, sharp, reliable, well-maintained, and now she was being pointed. When do I leave? She asked. Kane relaxed, just slightly, confirming he hadn't been entirely certain of her compliance until that moment. 2 days, he said. I'll arrange the escort to the border. Pack for an extended stay. He didn't ask if she had questions. He stood, straightened his jacket, and left. A man who'd accomplished what he came to accomplish and sought no reason to linger. Mara sat alone in the strategy room for a long time. She looked at the maps she'd spent the morning refining. The patrol routes in her careful handwriting. The water dispute that had kept 20 wolves from shifting against each other. Solved in 4 days, presented by Kane to the council, who approved it with the gracious confidence of a man used to being right. That night, alone in her room, Mara sat on the edge of her bed and felt something inside her go quiet. Not broken, not dramatic, just quiet. Like a fire that's been burning steadily for years, finally running out of the fuel that kept it going, and no one noticed the heat had changed. 4 years of her best thinking, 4 years of problems solved, and credit redirected to people who hadn't earned it. And when it came time for the pack to acknowledge she was a person, not a function, Kane hadn't even bothered to ask, he'd told her. She pulled the silver rank cord from her wrist, the one Kane had given her at her promotion, with a speech about loyalty and what it meant to be essential. She looked at it. Then she set it on the windowsill and didn't put it back on. 2 days later, a pack escort of 3 wolves brought her to the edge of Callum Ashvile's territory. They stopped at the tree line. One handed her a supply pack. None of them met her eyes. They left without looking back. Kane had sent a message instead of coming himself. Brief, practical, signed with his full title as if formality were a kindness. You know your purpose. Observe and report. Do not interfere with what is inevitable. The pack is grateful for your service. Mara read it once, folded it carefully, left it on the frost-pale ground at the tree line, and walked into Callum Ashvale's territory without looking back. On her third morning, Mara woke to find Callum hadn't summoned her. She dressed alone, ate alone in the narrow kitchen, grey light flat through the window, listened to the lodge exist around her, a silence that felt less like emptiness and more like something, deliberately maintained. Day 1, she told herself he needed time. Day 2, she told herself the same thing with less conviction. Day 3, she set down her cup harder than necessary and went to find him. Dressed, groundskeeper, border coordinator, a man who answered questions with the minimum words technically countable as an answer, told her Callum could usually be found in the map room until midday. The door was closed, not locked. She knocked once. It's open. He stood at the long table. Maps waited at the corners with river stones. Dark clothing. No rank markers. He didn't look up. The room told her things he hadn't. 3 walls of hand-drawn patrol records, dated, annotated in tight, precise script. Weather patterns, wildlife movement, soil conditions. A rigorous, solitary system maintained for the better part of a year. This wasn't the territory of a wolf who'd lost his grip on reason. This was the territory of a wolf who'd lost something and filled the space with the only thing he could still control. "You haven't called for me," Mara said. "No, 3 days. I'm aware." He turned, same careful neutrality. "Were you expecting to be put to work?" "I was expecting clarity. You said I could stay. You haven't told me what that means. You have a room and a fire and access to the kitchen. I didn't come here to be housed. What did you come here for?" Direct, no edge, somehow harder to answer than a challenge. Mara moved further in, eyes sweeping the patrol records. "I came here because I had no choice. I stayed because I think Kane's story about you is wrong, and I want to know what's actually true. And I'm still standing here at 7 in the morning because I can't sit in a corner waiting to be useful, and you haven't given me anything else to do." Silence. "You could rest," Callum said. "I don't know how." Something shifted, not quite a smile, a fractional easing. "Neither do I," he said. Apparently. He looked at her for a long moment. "The way you hold still when something is deciding whether you're a threat." "What are you good at?" he asked. "Patterns. I see them where other people see noise. Territorial logistics. Reading what maps aren't saying. The difference between a problem and the symptom of a problem located somewhere else entirely." Callum was quiet. Then he stepped back and gestured at the maps. "Northern border patrols past 6 months. 3 routes have repeated incursion alerts. Minor, nothing escalated, but consistent in a way that doesn't match normal Greywood movement. My coordinator thinks seasonal drift. I don't." Mara looked at the maps for 40 seconds. "It's not seasonal drift." Callum went still. "Explain." She pointed to the first marker, then the second, traced the line between them without touching the paper. "These 3 points form a corridor. Extend it forward." She traced the trajectory, and this isn't border testing. Someone's mapping your patrol timing, learning when you're not watching the western approach. The quality of the silence changed. "My coordinator's been reviewing these for 6 weeks, Callum said slowly. "Your coordinator's looking at each incident individually. You have to look at them as a sequence." Mara straightened. "Someone's building a picture of your vulnerability. That's different from a territorial dispute." Callum looked at the maps, then at her, then at the maps again. "Sit down," he said, but it wasn't the same kind of sit down. As before, 2 hours of silence broken only by her questions and his answers, terse, then forthcoming, then something close to collaborative, as the pattern became impossible to argue with. By mid-morning, she'd identified 7 coordinated incursion points, a probable timing window for the next approach, and a revised patrol rotation that would close the corridor without advertising it had been found. She pushed the sketch across the table. Callum looked at it a long time. 6 weeks, he said again. "Quiet. I know. You saw it in 40 seconds. I saw the beginning of it in 40 seconds. It took 2 hours to be certain." She paused. Don't be embarrassed for your coordinator. He was looking for what he expected to find. I wasn't looking for anything yet, so I could see what was actually there. A long silence. Whatever Kane told you your purpose here was, Callum said, that is not what I need. Mara waited. I don't need a keeper. I don't need someone to make my decline comfortable or report my deterioration with clinical notes. His voice stayed level. I need someone who tells me the truth about what they see, without management, without the kind of kindness that's actually just a more sophisticated form of control. He met her eyes. Can you do that? I've never been particularly good at sophisticated kindness, Mara said. Ask anyone who's worked with me. I'm asking you. Yes, I can do that. Then I have a condition. Tell me. You don't report to Kane. Whatever you see here, whatever you conclude, it doesn't leave this territory without my knowledge. If you can't agree to that, the arrangement ends here. Mara thought of Kane's message, folded on the frost-pale ground. I left his instructions behind when I crossed your border, she said. He doesn't know that yet, but he will. Something moved through Callum's eyes, relief, and the wariness of someone who's been given good news before and learned not to trust it. Why? He asked. Because the story's telling about what you doesn't match what's in front of me, Mara said. And I've spent 4 years making a man look right who wasn't. I have very little patience left for it. Something moved through Callum's eyes, not the easing she'd seen before. Something deeper. The look of someone who's been carrying something alone and just had it named for the first time. There's one more thing, he said. Tell me. He was quiet, deciding whether to cross a line from neutrality into something that needed more exposure than neutrality allowed. My condition, he said. What has Kane told you? That your bond destabilized 8 months ago. That it's progressing. That the prognosis is, she chose the word carefully, unfavorable. And what do you think? Mara looked at him steadily. At the tension along his left side he still wasn't showing. At his clear, focused eyes. At the map room, documented, systematic, maintained with the discipline of a wolf who hadn't lost his grip on anything. I think unfavorable is a conclusion, not an observation. I'd like to see the observations before I accept the conclusion. For the first time since she'd arrived, Callum looked at her with something that wasn't assessment. Not trust yet, the thing that comes just before it. I'll make you a deal, he said. I'm listening. Help me understand the border situation. Bring me what you see, plainly, without softening it. He paused. In return, I'll tell you what I actually know about my condition, not the version the shaman's been feeding the council. Something sharpened in Mara's chest. Not excitement. The feeling of scattered data points starting to resolve into a shape. Those terms are acceptable. Good. He pulled a second set of maps from beneath the first, older, worn, annotated in a different hand. Then let's begin. By the 8th day, they'd built something neither of them had named. Not a routine. Routines implied comfort, and comfort implied a safety neither had earned. More like a working agreement between two people who'd independently concluded that the alternative to collaboration was an isolation neither could afford. Mara arrived each morning before Callum finished his pre-dawn run. She made tea, strong, no additions, the way she'd noticed he drank it, and had it waiting when he came in, carrying the cold of the territory, and the focused quiet of a man who hadn't, yet shifted back into conversation. He never commented on the tea, she never mentioned making it, but it was always finished before he returned to the maps. The border problem had deepened. What looked like coordinated mapping revealed a second layer. Incursion timing correlated not just with patrol gaps, but with specific weather windows. Whoever was watching had resources. Patience. This wasn't impulsive. This isn't a rival pack testing boundaries, Mara said on the 9th morning, pushing the correlation chart across the table. This is intelligence work. Someone's building a case. Callum studied it. A case for what? Territorial instability. She held his gaze. If the record shows repeated incursions, a degraded patrol pattern, an Alpha 2 compromised to respond, that's grounds for a formal territorial review. The silence had a specific quality. Kane, Callum said. Not a question. The incursion started 8 months ago, Mara said carefully. The same month your bond destabilized. She watched him absorb that. No rage, no visible distress. He went still, not suppressing something volatile, but processing information he wasn't surprised to receive, integrating it into a picture he'd been building for a while. He needed me unstable, Callum said quietly, and once I was, he started building the evidence to make it official. That's my read. I could be wrong. You're not. He pushed back from the table, moved to the window. A territorial review needs documented evidence of incapacity. Without it, challenging an established alpha requires a formal combat petition, and that draws attention Kane doesn't want. He paused. A quiet administrative review. 8 months of incursion records. A shaman's assessment confirming deterioration. Much cleaner. He wouldn't even need to be present, Mara said. No. He turned from the window. He'd just need the documentation. Which I was sent to provide, Mara said. The words landed without drama. Just the fact of it, placed plainly between them. Callum looked at her. And instead you're building the counter-documentation. I find it's become a habit, Mara said. Seeing what's actually there. Something moved through his expression, not gratitude. Something more internal. The look of a person who's been holding something alone for a long time, and just discovered he isn't holding it entirely alone anymore. He said nothing. But when he sat back down, the careful distance he kept from other people had shrunk. Fractionally. She didn't think he'd decided to let it. She filed it away and said nothing. On the 11th day, they were doing a walking survey of the western border. Mara with her notebook. Callum moving with his usual quiet economy, the landscape grey-green and frost-edged and still. She was noting a terrain feature when she heard him stop. She turned. He stood 6 feet back on the path, and something had changed. The economy was gone. His left hand braced against a pine, fingers pressed hard into the bark, head bowed. The tension along his left side, always so carefully controlled, had broken through. A fine trembling ran through his whole left arm. His jaw was rigid, holding something back by main force. His eyes, when he looked up, were amber. Not the clear dark she'd gotten used to. Amber, lit from within. The wolf pushing against the surface, uninvited, and he was working to contain it. Every word of Kane's briefing surfaced at once. The feral wolf, the uncontrolled shifts, the 2 women who hadn't lasted a week. Mara took a breath and stepped closer, not back, not sideways. Closer. One deliberate step, either the most instinctively correct thing she'd ever done, or a catastrophic misread. She wouldn't know which for 10 seconds. Callum's eyes tracked to her immediately. She held his gaze, didn't look away, didn't reach for the studied calm of someone managing a threat. Because she wasn't managing a threat. She was looking at something in pain, trying hard not to be seen in pain. 2 different situations, 2 different responses. Where does it start? She said quietly. When it comes on like this. Your chest, your hands. The question stopped something. A visible shift in his stillness, the amber flickering, like the wolf had hit something unexpected and was recalibrating. The trembling in his arm didn't stop, but it changed. Less suppression, more endurance. Chest, he said, rough, lower than usual. Then the left side, then the hands. How long does it usually last? 10 minutes. Sometimes less. And the shaman's protocol when it happens? A beat. Restraint and sedation. That sounds extremely unpleasant. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. The ghost of one. It is, he said. Does the restraint stop it or just prevent consequences? He stared at her. No one's ever asked me that. Is that an I don't know or an it just prevents the consequences? It just prevents the consequences, he said slowly, the answer arriving to him as he said it. The episode runs its full duration either way. The restraint just means nothing gets damaged. So the protocol protects the environment from you, Mara said. Not the other way around. The amber was fading, the trembling easing. Whether that was the episode ending naturally or the conversation, she filed the question away. Yes, Callum said. That's precisely what it is. And afterward, they record it. Duration, intensity, evidence of partial shift. The shaman adds it to the file. even voice. More documentation of progressive instability. In 8 months, have you ever harmed anyone during an episode? No. Damaged anything? A pause. Several trees, one section of fence. So the file says progressive instability. And the reality is you've managed a recurring episode for 8 months without harming anyone, without losing function. She held his gaze. Does that sound accurate to you? The silence changed quality again. No one's ever put it that way, he said. How have they put it? Like I'm something to be watched for signs of deterioration. And how do you put it? He was quiet a long moment. The amber was gone, the trembling gone. He straightened off the tree, tested his own steadiness, and looked at her with the clear dark eyes she'd come to know. Like I'm fighting something, he said, and losing. Slowly. What if you're not losing? Explain. What if the episodes aren't deterioration? What if your wolf is trying to complete something and getting stopped before it can finish? She held his gaze. Every protocol you've described is designed to interrupt the episode, contain it, a pause. No one's asked what happens if you let it finish. Callum stared at her. That's a dangerous question. It's an obvious one, she said, which makes it strange no one's asked it. He looked at her for a long time. Come back to the lodge, he said finally. There's something I need to show you. They sat in the map room as the light shifted to grey. Callum unlocked the lower drawer of his desk and withdrew a leather-bound journal. He didn't hand it over immediately. He held it, looking at it the way you look at something you've never shown anyone, deciding whether this is the moment that changes. Then he held it out. I've been documenting the episodes myself, he said, since the beginning. Not for the shaman, not the council. A pause. For me. It was the only agency I had. Mara took it carefully. Opened it to the first entry, meticulous. Dates, times, duration, location, weather, what he'd been doing before, what it felt like from the inside, how it resolved. Months of precise, private record-keeping by a wolf who'd been told he was deteriorating and refused to take the verdict on faith. She read in silence. He watched her read without watching her. The way you look at something else in the room, when what you're actually attending to is something you can't afford to be seen attending to. After a long time, she looked up. Callum, what did you find? They're not random, they cycle. She turned the journal toward him. 6 to 8 weeks between the major episodes. Smaller ones in between, but the big ones. Consistent interval. I noticed the interval. I didn't know what it meant. It means your wolf isn't deteriorating randomly. It's attempting something, on a schedule, the same thing, repeatedly, at regular intervals. She looked at him. What was happening 8 months ago, right before the first one? Callum went very still, not the managed stillness, the deep kind. There was a bond match ceremony, he said slowly. An alliance bond between Silvermark's leadership and Greywood's. It needed an unmated alpha of rank. He paused. I was the candidate. And did it take place? It was initiated. His voice went careful, precise. The bond formation sequence began, and then he stopped. And then the shaman intervened, said there was an anomaly, an instability indicating I wasn't a suitable match. The ceremony was halted. He looked at the journal. The first episode happened 3 days later. Mara's mind went quiet, the way it went quiet when a pattern resolved. Which shaman? Drustin, Kane's personal shaman, 15 years in the role. And the alliance bond after the ceremony was halted. What happened to it? Transferred, Callum said, to a different candidate, one of Kane's. He stopped again. One of Kane's what? Preferred candidates, Callum said quietly. A wolf whose territory borders 3 of the most valuable trade routes in the region. A bond match that gave Kane's coalition serious material advantage. He looked at her. A bond match that couldn't happen if I'd completed the ceremony first. The room went quiet. Mara closed the journal gently. Your wolf didn't destabilize, she said. The bond formation was interrupted, deliberately, and it's been trying to finish what it started ever since. Callum looked at her, the moment the shape of it fully arrived. Not new information, a framework, finally built around 8 months of unresolved evidence. The look of someone who's been in a dark room and just watched someone find the light switch. If that's true, he said, then everything Druston's been recording is documentation of your wolf trying to heal itself, Mara said. Not deteriorating. Trying to finish something that was stopped, and every intervention has been interrupting the attempt. She held his gaze. You haven't been declining for 8 months, Callum. You've been fighting something, and the people supposed to be helping you have been making sure you lose. The longest silence they'd sat in together. Outside, the territory had gone dark. The fire burned low. Neither had noticed. Callum reached across the table and closed his hand over the journal, a quiet gesture barely visible in the firelight. No one's ever tried to understand it, he said. They've tried to manage it. Record it, contain it. He looked at her. You're the first person who asked what it actually is. Someone should have asked a long time ago. Why are you asking now? She thought of Kane's message on the frost-pale ground. 4 years of problems solved and credit redirected. The rank cord on the windowsill. Because Kane wanted you broken, she said. Which makes understanding what's actually happening to you the most useful thing I've ever done. A pause, and because it's the right thing. And I've done the convenient thing long enough that the right things started to feel urgent. Callum looked at her steadily. Then, very quietly, I need to show you something else. He stood, moved to the window and, after a hesitation, unbuttoned his collar and pulled it aside. Marks ran from his throat down across his collarbone, vanishing below the fabric. Irregular patterns under the skin, dark in places, lighter in others. Like something mapped in ink that hadn't dried. Mara crossed to him. She looked, not cataloguing a condition, but reading something that mattered. They appear during episodes, Callum said. Darken, fade afterward. The shaman records them as evidence of progressive deterioration. They're not deterioration. How can you know? Deterioration moves in one direction. She looked up at him. These move in a pattern, appear, intensify, fade cyclically, always incomplete. She held his gaze. Your body's trying to finish a process. The marks are the map of the attempt, not the evidence of failure. Callum went still. She was close enough to touch the marks without extending her arm. She didn't, but the distance between them had a new kind of attention now. Quieter than the analytical focus of the last hour, settling into the space where the conversation had run out of words. They're not monstrous, she said softly. Everyone who's seen them has treated them like evidence I should be afraid of myself. They're evidence your wolf's been fighting for 8 months without help. She met his eyes. That's not something to be afraid of. That's something to be angry about. Something moved through his expression. Deeper than anything he'd shown her in 8 days. The relief of having something true named by someone else. After carrying it alone so long, it shows on the face whether you want it to or not. He didn't move away. Neither did she. The fire had nearly burned out. Outside, the territory was fully dark. I need to see Druston's records, Mara said finally. He keeps them at the shaman's archive. Main settlement. I know. 3 hours from here. I know. You're going to go there. I'm going to find out what was done to you, Mara said. Whatever it takes. A long silence. Mara. First time he'd said her name without a question attached. Just her name. The word itself, the whole point. Be careful, he said. Not a request to reconsider. Not an attempt to stop her. The way you say, be careful. When what happens to someone has started to matter to you, and you're not ready to say that directly. So, be careful. Is the most honest thing available. I will, Mara said. She left with the journal, 8 days of notes, and the settled certainty of someone who's found the shape of the problem and knows exactly where to look for proof. Behind her, Callum stayed very still for a long time. He arrived without warning on the 15th day. Mara heard the vehicle on the northern track. Unusual enough that she was moving to the window before she'd decided to. Callum was on the western border, an hour out. Dressed was in the outbuildings. The lodge was, for practical purposes, unattended. A dark vehicle stopped at the front approach. One man got out, older 60, maybe. with the stillness of someone who'd spent decades controlling what his body gave away. Gray and copper, the shaman's formal designation, official capacity, which meant this would be recorded, which meant everything in the next hour became documentation. He carried a leather case and the expression of a man who'd never once questioned his right to be anywhere. Mara recognized the type immediately. She'd worked for one for 4 years. She was at the door before he reached it. "The lodge isn't receiving visitors," she said. Druston stopped on the path, looked at her with the assessment powerful men deploy when they hit an obstacle they didn't expect. "I'm not a visitor," he said, measured, deep, no warmth. "I'm Drustan, Pack Shaman, here for Alpha Asheville's scheduled monthly assessment. Stand aside. Alpha Asheville's schedule is managed by Alpha Asheville. He didn't mention an assessment. He's not required to. The protocol was established by the Elder Council. It doesn't require advance notice." A pause deliberate. "You're the offering Kane sent." The word landed exactly as intended. Mara didn't move. "I'm a guest of the Alpha," she said, "who's on patrol and can't be interrupted without cause. An official health assessment is cause. Then he'll be available when he returns. You're welcome to wait on the path." Something tightened around Druston's eyes. Recalibration. He'd expected either an empty lodge or someone who'd step back from institutional authority. He got neither. "You're obstructing an official pack mandate," he said. "Do you understand the consequences?" "I understand the Alpha has a right to be present for any assessment conducted on his person. I understand showing up unannounced isn't standard protocol, regardless of what the Council authorized. And I understand you've run 8 months of these assessments with no improvement in his condition." She held his gaze without effort. "So forgive me if I'm not in a hurry to facilitate the 9th. Absolute silence on the path. Druston looked at her the way she'd seen men in council rooms. Look at someone who'd said something true, in public, that they weren't prepared to hear. Not anger yet. The thing before anger, when anger needs managing. "You're Kane's placement," he said slowly, "which means you answer to Kane. Stand aside, or your family's standing in Silvermark gets considerably more precarious. My family's standing is already being used as leverage by the man who sent me here. You'll have to find a different tool." Something moved through Druston's expression. Not quite surprise. Not quite respect, entirely unwilling to be either. He stepped back. "I'll return when the Alpha is present. Tell him I came." "I'll tell him everything about this visit," Mara said. "You can rely on that." Mara stayed in the doorway until the vehicle was gone. Then she went inside and wrote down the time, the date, and every word of the exchange in precise detail. If this visit was being recorded as official documentation, so was her account of it. Callum returned an hour later, quiet, efficient, shedding the cold at the door. He stopped when he saw her face. What happened? Druston was here unannounced. "Official assessment," he said. I turned him away. The stillness that moved through Callum was the deep kind. "You turned away the Pack Shaman. You weren't here. He was going to enter the lodge in your absence and assess you without your knowledge." She met his eyes. "I documented everything. Time, date, exact language. If he records this as a completed assessment, we have proof it wasn't." Callum looked at her for a long moment. "Kane will hear about this before nightfall. I know. He won't be pleased. I know that too. Mara, careful. What you just did, turning away an official mandate, that's not small. The consequences for you are mine to manage. I made a choice. I'd make it again." He studied her, then sat and looked at her notes. "Tell me everything he said. Word for word," she told him. He listened without interrupting, going progressively still. Not suppressed anger, but the look of someone watching the final piece of a long-built picture confirm exactly what he'd suspected. "He threatened your family," Callum said when she finished. "He tried. I told him the leverage had already been used, and he left. He left." Another silence. "Why didn't you just let him in?" Not an accusation, a real question. It would have been easier, less exposure for you. Mara considered it honestly. "Because every assessment he's done has produced documentation of your deterioration. I've spent a week looking at your own records, and I don't believe you're deteriorating, which means his assessments aren't objective. A pause. And because I'm tired of watching people with authority use it to confirm conclusions they walked in with. Callum was quiet. That's the second time, he said. You've done something significant on my behalf without being asked. The border documentation was self-directed. I wanted to understand the pattern. The first time, Callum said, was when you stepped toward me on the western path instead of away. The room went still. Mara held his gaze and said nothing because nothing needed saying, and adding words would have managed the moment. And she was done, managing things that deserved to just be what they were. Callum looked down at her notes. There's something in the assessment files, he said quietly. Something Drustan doesn't know I know. When he does an assessment, he records 2 sets of notes, the formal report for the council, and field notes he files at the archive. They don't always say the same thing. Mara went very still. How do you know that? 6 months ago, a field note got misfiled with my territory records. It documented an episode in full detail, and then, at the bottom, different ink, a line that wasn't in the formal report. What did it say? Callum met her eyes. Bond reformation indicators present. Do not include in council summary. The words dropped into the room like something from a height. Mara felt 15 days of pattern lock into its final shape. Cold, clear, provable. He's been recording evidence of your recovery, she said, and removing it from the official reports. At least 6 months. Possibly longer. The archive. His original field notes. From the start, they'd be in the shaman's archive at the main settlement. Yes. Then that's where I need to go. Callum looked at her steadily. The archives in the main settlement. Silvermark territory. Kane's territory. I know. If Kane already knows Drustan was turned away, he'll be watching for movement from here. Then I go tonight, Mara said. Before he has time to arrange anything. Mara. Callum. She said his name the way he'd said hers. No question attached. Just the name, carrying everything underneath it. He's done this to you for 8 months. Drustan's been sitting in this lodge, looking you in the eyes, and erasing the evidence of your recovery so Kane gets the documentation he needs to take your territory. Even. Precise. No performance. I'm going to get the proof, and then we use it. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, the territory was darkening, grey and deep blue draining from the sky, the tree line going solid black against the horizon. You'll need the archive layout, he said finally. Tell me, he told her. The building's location, entry points, the filing system, exactly where the field records were stored. No attempt to talk her out of it. No offer to go instead. No softening the risk. Because somewhere in the last 15 days, he'd understood she didn't want her choices managed any more than he did. When he finished, he was quiet a moment. There's a side window on the eastern wall. The latch broke 2 years ago. Drustan reported it. Nothing was done. You checked. 6 months ago. When I found the misfiled note, I went myself. But the archives watched after dark, and He stopped. I wasn't stable enough to risk being seen in the main settlement. But you were already planning this. I was already hoping, he said. There's a difference. Mara looked at him, a wolf who'd fought alone for 8 months, documenting his own condition because it was the only agency he had, holding one piece of proof for 6 months with no one to act on it with. I'll be back before dawns, she said. I know. And then, very quietly, almost not words at all, I'll be... Quick pause. If you've made it this far. If you felt it when Callum said, I'll be here. You already know this isn't really a story about a broken alpha and a sacrificial offering. It never was. It's about 2 people, failed by every system meant to protect them, finding each other at the edge of the world and deciding, quietly, without permission, to stop losing. And it's about to get a lot more dangerous. Mara is walking into Kane's territory tonight. Alone, in the dark, to find proof that 8 months of Callum's suffering wasn't inevitable. It was engineered. She's going to find what Drustan's been hiding. And when she walks back through that door before dawn, everything changes. If this story has you hooked, hit subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Tell me what you felt when Callum said, "I'll be here. I read everyone." Now let's go back. The Shaman's archive sat in Silvermark's eastern quarter, a low stone building unremarkable by design, the kind of structure that relied on institutional authority instead of locks. Mara found the broken window latch exactly where Callum said it would be. She climbed through without hesitation. The archive smelled of old ink and cedar. The stillness of a room holding things other people had decided no one should see. Moonlight through the eastern window gave her just enough light to read the filing system without risking anything visible from outside. Shelves floor to ceiling, territorial records, council minutes, bond registrations, health assessments, organized by name in Drustan's precise copperplate hand. She found Callum's file in under 4 minutes, thicker than she expected. She carried it to the table under the window and spread it out, hands steady despite the cold and the dark and the knowledge that if she was found here, the consequences went well beyond her. The formal assessment reports were on top. 9 months of them, identical in structure, each ending with the same clinical language. Progressive bond deterioration, instability indicators, unfavorable prognosis. She'd expected these, set them aside. Underneath, the field notes, faster handwriting, less structured, written in the moment, not composed after. The raw observations, before Drustan decided what the council was allowed to know. She started reading. The first 3 months matched the formal reports closely enough. The destabilization, documented in detail. Drustan's early notes were thorough, genuinely uncertain. He hadn't decided what he was looking at yet. Then, month 4, something changed. A line that didn't appear in the formal report. Episode duration 17 minutes. Post-episode examination reveals significant tissue regeneration along bond formation pathways. Markers consistent with active repair process rather than deterioration. Wolf appears to be attempting autonomous bond completion, intervention required to prevent successful reformation. Mara read it 3 times. Intervention required to prevent successful reformation. Not to support the process, not to assist recovery, to prevent it. Month 5, another line absent from the official record. Bond reformation attempt detected at 31% completion, before suppression charm activation, increasing charm potency to ensure interruption at lower threshold. Alpha's Wolf is adapting to current suppression levels, escalation necessary. Her hands went completely still on the paper. Month 6, the misfiled note Callum had found. She recognized the handwriting, the same deliberate excision. Bond reformation indicators present at 34%. Suppression charm performing within required parameters. Council summary to reflect continued deterioration. Do not include reformation data. Then month 7, one line that made everything before it resolve into its final shape. Alpha Ashville's bond is anchoring. Scent markers indicate bond formation pathway orienting toward a specific target. Target as yet unidentified. If bond locates its anchor and completes formation, suppression will become significantly more difficult to maintain. Notify Elder Kane immediately. Mara sat back. The archive was quiet. Outside, the settlement was dark and still. 3 hours north, Callum was waiting in a lodge occupied alone for 8 months. While a man he trusted to monitor his health carefully, methodically, with full documentation, made sure he stayed broken. Not because he was deteriorating, because he was healing. A recovered Callum Ashvale, bond complete, authority restored, would reclaim everything Kane's coalition had been quietly absorbing for 8 months. Would invalidate the redirected alliance bond. Would become exactly the force Kane had spent a year making sure he could never become. She copied every suppressed entry into her notebook, returned the file to its exact position, climbed back through the window into the cold dark. The evidence in her handwriting, and the settled fury of someone who's seen the full picture and knows exactly what it cost. 8 months. Episodes endured alone. A wolf trying, over and over, to complete something that kept being ripped away. Documentation built to make the fighting look like failing. A man believing, because every authority told him so, that he was losing. He had never been losing. He'd been winning, incrementally, persistently, against a suppression that had to keep escalating because he kept finding ways through it. And no one told him, because the person paid to tell him was the one making sure he never found out. She pushed open the lodge door. Callum was at the map room table, exactly where she'd left him, journal open, fire rebuilt, 2 cups of tea already made waiting. He looked up. She crossed the room and set her notebook in front of him, open to the first copied entry. He knew, she said. From the 4th month, your wolf was healing itself, and Drustan was actively suppressing it and erasing the evidence from his reports. Even. Precise. You were never broken, Callum. You were kept that way. Callum looked down at the notebook. She watched him read, watched the stillness move through him, the deep kind, something fundamental restructuring underneath it. When he looked up, his eyes were clear, dark, focused. What do we do? We finish it, Mara said. We figure out how to complete what your wolf's been trying to do for 8 months, and we do it before Cain realizes what we found. And then, she said quietly, Drustan and Cain answer for it, in front of everyone who was told you were broken. Callum reached across the table, not for the notebook, not the tea. He closed his hand over hers, once briefly, not asking for anything, not offering comfort, just acknowledging, in the only language available, that she'd gone into the dark for him and come back with the truth. He let go. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning, and Mara told him. They worked through what remained of the night. Mara laid it all out, the copied field notes, 15 days of documented episodes, Callum's journal, the incursion charts, the timeline she'd been building since day 4 without knowing what it was a timeline of. Together, it told a story more coherent and more damning than either had seen alone. Walk me through it, Callum said. From the beginning, your bond formation started at the ceremony 8 months ago. The process began. Drustan intervened, not because of an anomaly, but because a completed bond would have made you too powerful to manage. He used a suppression charm to halt it at whatever percentage it had reached, and after. Your wolf kept trying to finish. She indicated the journal. Every episode for 8 months is your wolf attempting to complete the sequence. It gets to 30, 31, 34%, and the charm pulls it back. She looked at him. It's been trying to heal itself, over and over, and every time it gets close, something stops it. Callum went still. The escalating potency, because you kept adapting. Your wolf isn't deteriorating. It's getting stronger. The suppression has to keep increasing because you keep finding ways around it. A pause. You've been winning, Callum. Incrementally, against something built specifically to make sure you couldn't. And no one told you because the person responsible for telling you was being paid not to. The fire crackled. Outside, the dark was just beginning to shift toward grey. If the bond formation needs to complete, Callum said slowly, the suppression charm needs to come off. Yes, Drustan's the only one who can remove it. Drustan's not going to remove it, Mara said. So we need another way. She turned to the section of notes she'd been building toward. The charm interrupts the sequence once it hits a threshold. It can't stop the sequence from starting. Every attempt your wolf's made has built gradually. That gives the charm time to respond. She leaned forward, but it was calibrated for gradual. What if the sequence triggered all at once? Full intensity. What if the charm can't respond fast enough to stop it before it completes? The room went quiet. You're describing, Callum said carefully, deliberately triggering the most intense bond formation attempt my wolf has ever made. Yes, which would feel from the inside like the worst episode I've had. Significantly worse. Yes, that could kill me. Or it could finish what your wolf's been trying to finish for 8 months. She held his gaze. Every other approach has been about containing the episodes, preventing them from completing. A pause. What if we did the opposite? gave your wolf everything it needs, an anchor, a grounding presence, nothing interrupting it, and let it finish? An anchor, Callum said. Careful, he understood exactly what the word implied, and was deciding how directly to address it. The field notes, Mara said, just as careful. Month 7. Druston noted your bond formation pathway was orienting toward a specific target, that the bond was anchoring. A pause. Do you know what that means? The silence stretched. Yes, Callum said. Do you know who? He looked at her across the table with the clear, dark eyes that had been watching her. She now understood, with a recognition that had arrived well before her own yes. Quietly, no elaboration. Mara held his gaze a moment longer than a professional silence and shorter than an admission. I'm not a shaman, she said. No formal training in bond formation or suppression mechanics. Everything I've told you is pattern recognition. Educated inference, not certainty. I know. This could fail, make everything worse. The episode could exceed what your body can manage, and I'd have no way to, Mara. She stopped. Do you believe it'll work? She thought of the journal. The field notes. 8 months of a wolf that refused to stop trying. The escalating charm potency. Proof he kept adapting, kept finding ways through, kept moving towards something his animal had decided was worth every attempt. Yes, she said. Your wolf knows exactly what it's doing. It's known for 8 months. It just needs someone to stay through it instead of stopping it. Callum stood. Came around the table. Stood before her with an expression she had no category for, somewhere past trust, before whatever comes after it. When? He asked. Tonight, Mara said. Before Kane finds out what we took. Before Drustan comes back with authorization we can't turn away. Tonight. Are you certain? I've been dying slowly for 8 months, Callum said. Or I believed I was. Either way, I'd rather risk everything trying to live than spend another night being carefully maintained in a decline that was never mine. Mara nodded once. Then we prepare, she said, and tonight we finish it. They spent the day preparing in the silence of 2 people who've decided something irreversible and are now just moving through the hours before it. Mara gathered what she needed, organized everything so it could be found, regardless of how the night went. She didn't think about that possibility directly. Acknowledged it, prepared for it, didn't dwell. Callum settled the lodge's affairs with the thoroughness of a man who didn't leave things unfinished. Instructions for dressed. The border rotation filed. He sat a long time with his journal open and wrote nothing. At dusk, they ate together. Not much conversation. At full dark, they moved to the main room. The fire burning highest, and Mara looked at him across the hearthlight. Tell me what you need. Stay, he said. Whatever happens, don't let them stop it. No one's coming through that door tonight, she said. I promise you that. He nodded once. Then he closed his eyes and let his wolf come. It started quietly, deeper breathing, a stillness different from his usual stillness, something loosening in the control he kept over himself at all hours. Amber rose slowly in his eyes. The tension along his left side surfaced, then spread, like a tide coming in. Mara sat across from him, didn't move, didn't look away. Talk to me, he said, voice already rougher. Keep me here. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. The sequence built faster than anything she'd documented. The marks surfaced along his throat and collarbone, darker than she'd ever seen, spreading with a velocity none of the previous episodes had reached. His wolf wasn't approaching the threshold gradually this time. It was running at it. His breathing went labored. The marks went almost black. It's working, she said, voice steady. Your wolf knows what it's doing. Let it. Mara, her name in his voice, barely recognizable. If this doesn't, it will. You don't know. Callum. She crossed to him, took his face in her hands, made him look at her. Your wolf has been fighting for 8 months without help. It knows exactly where it's going. The only thing that's ever stopped it is someone interrupting. She held his gaze. I'm not going to interrupt it, and neither are you. He looked at her, amber eyes and underneath, entirely his own. Then the sequence crested. His whole body went rigid. Every muscle. One sustained moment of absolute tension that lasted long enough for Mara's heart to stop making any sound she could hear. Then he went completely still. Not the managed stillness, the other kind. Callum. Silence. Callum, come back. She pressed her hand flat against his chest. Nothing. No racing pulse. No wolf pushing against the surface. The marks had gone nearly opaque, spread to their furthest reach. Then they began to fade. Not the slow recession she'd documented for weeks. This was rapid, deliberate, a tide going out all at once. Darkness retreating from the edges inward, until the last mark dissolved and left nothing behind but clear, unmarked skin. His chest rose slowly, then again, deeper. His eyes opened, dark, completely, fully dark. Not a trace of amber, not the careful control she'd grown used to. Just his eyes, clear all the way through, looking at her, with an expression that combined recognition and relief, and something that had been waiting so long. It had stopped believing in its own arrival. Mara, he said. Just her name. She felt it. The bond clicking into place like a key turning in a lock jammed for 8 months, suddenly not. Warm, certain, running through her before she'd finished understanding what it was. Oh, she breathed. I know, he said. I've known for a while. She laughed, the sound arriving before she expected it, breaking on something that wasn't quite a sob, and wasn't quite relief, and was probably both. He reached for her and she went to him, and when he pressed his forehead to hers, she felt the bond settle into its completed shape around them both, like something that had always been there, just waiting for permission to be real. You stayed, he said. I told you I would. He kissed her then, not gently, with the intensity of a man who's been managing everything for 8 months and just got permission to stop. She kissed him back the same way. A woman who spent 4 years being useful to people who didn't see her and just got seen completely. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, he pulled back just far enough to look at her face in the firelight. It worked, he said. Your wolf worked, Mara corrected. I just stayed. Staying, Callum said quietly, was everything. The recovery wasn't instantaneous, but it was undeniable. Within 3 days, the tension along Callum's left side, the one he'd managed so carefully, he'd stopped noticing he was doing, it was gone. His movement through the lodge changed. The deliberate economy outdoors, the careful placement of feet and shoulders, the constant monitoring for an oncoming episode, all of it dissolved, replaced by something easier, the movement of a wolf no longer bracing for something. He slept through the night for the first time in 8 months. He didn't mention it. Mara noticed, said nothing, filed it with the tea, the growing collection of things between them that didn't need narrating. On the 4th day, Drustan arrived, official this time. Documentation from the Elder Council, immediate access, mandatory assessment, stamped with Kane's seal, witnessed by 2 council members, no turning him away on procedure. Callum opened the door himself. Drustan stopped. Whatever he'd prepared for, another episode in progress, a wolf deteriorating on schedule, 8 months of manufactured evidence confirming itself. It wasn't this. Callum, standing fully upright in the doorway, clear eyes, easy shoulders, the stillness of a recovered wolf, not a managed one. The leather case in Drustan's hand went still. Your Grace, he said carefully. Come in, Callum said. We have things to discuss. They sat in the map room. Callum at the head, Mara beside him, Drustan across with his case open, his composure intact, his eyes moving between them with the rapid calculation of a man whose narrative had just collapsed and was scrambling for a new one. He didn't get the chance. Callum placed Mara's notebook on the table, opened it. Bond reformation indicators present. He read level, do not include in council summary. Next page. Intervention required to prevent successful reformation. Next. Suppression charm escalated to prevent bond completion. Alpha adapting to current levels. He closed the notebook. You documented my recovery, Callum said, and removed it from every report to the council for 8 months. Drustan's composure held. Barely. Those are field notes. Preliminary. They require context. They require an explanation, Callum said, which you'll give the full Elder Council, along with the complete account of the suppression charm you placed on my bond formation without my knowledge or consent. No rise in his voice, didn't need one. Or you give it to the territorial tribunal, where the context will be a lot less favorable. Silence. Absolute. Drustan looked at the notebook, at Callum, at Mara. She broke into the archive, he said finally. The last available move, redirect to her violation. She recovered records that belonged to me. No, Callum said. That you withheld, that document what was done to me without consent. A pause. Would you like to discuss that distinction in front of the tribunal? Drustan said nothing. You have a choice, Callum said. The council, where I control the framing, or the tribunal, where the records do. He held the older man's gaze. Choose before I choose for you. Drustan chose. He left 20 minutes later, without his case, without his composure, without the institutional authority he'd carried into every room for 15 years. Mara watched him go from the window. He'll go to Kane. Immediately, Callum agreed, which gives us about 4 hours before Kane decides how to respond. How does he respond? He comes himself. No other move. Kane arrived in 3, alone, which told Mara everything about how he'd assessed it. Not official. Not a council action. A man coming to negotiate privately before this went public, because he already understood it had turned. He walked in, looked at Callum, the recovered alpha, clear eyes, the completed bond visible to any wolf with the senses to read it, and Mara watched him absorb the full scope of the failure. His expression didn't collapse. Men like Kane don't collapse. They recalculate. This isn't what it appears, he began. It appears, Callum said, to be exactly what it is. The suppression was precautionary. Your instability posed a genuine risk to the packs. Elder Kane. Mara's voice was quiet, no heat. He looked at her, first time directly since walking in, the reluctance of a man acknowledging an obstacle he'd underestimated. You sent me here to watch him fail. Told me to bear witness and not interfere. She held his gaze. You thought I was the kind of person who'd follow those instructions. You were always reliable. I was always useful, she said. You mistook that for compliant. They're not the same thing. Kane looked at her a long moment. You've made a significant enemy today, he said quietly. I had one already, Mara said. I just didn't know it yet. Callum stepped forward, not threatening, just occupying the full presence that hadn't been available to him for 8 months. You'll appear before the full Elder Council within the week. You'll answer for the suppression charm, for Drustan's falsified reports, and for the territorial destabilization you've been engineering since the ceremony. Level, absolute. Leave my territory, Elder Kane. Don't return without a council summons. Kane left, not with dignity. With the contained fury of a man who'd played a long game, watched it end in the wrong room with the wrong outcome, and had no move left that didn't make it worse. Mara didn't watch him go. She'd already turned away. They said the Alpha was broken. They said Mara Voss was being sacrificed. They were wrong about everything that mattered. The Elder Council convened within the week. Drustan's records went in full. Every suppressed field note, every falsified summary, every documented bond formation attempt recorded privately and erased publicly. 3 independent shamans examined Callum's bond formation pathways and confirmed, without ambiguity, deliberate sustained intervention entirely without consent. Kane's coalition didn't survive the tribunal. Drustan didn't survive it professionally. Callum Ashvale walked out with his territorial claim restored, his bond complete, and 8 months of manufactured deterioration struck from the record. Mara's family's standing wasn't just restored, formally recognized. The council's way of acknowledging, without quite admitting, that what had been done to her had been done in the pack's name, and the pack owed her something for it. She didn't return to Silvermark. She stayed, not because she had nowhere else, because she chose it. The way you choose things once you've learned the difference between what's available and what's actually yours. She built something in the Northern Territory that used everything she was. A network for wolves displaced by pack politics, for Omegas, whose service had been redirected, whose standing had been leveraged, who'd been sent to the edges of the world by people who called it necessary. She knew how those systems worked from the inside. Every mechanism, every euphemism, every smile that meant something was being taken. She used that knowledge to take them apart, one wolf at a time. Callum supported the work without directing it. Resources, no conditions. Her partner, in the precise sense, not her alpha, not her authority. Just the person who stood beside her and asked. Nothing beyond her presence and her honesty, which he'd learned early, were the only things he'd ever actually needed. On quiet evenings, fire burned to embers, work spread across the table between them. Mara would sometimes look up and find him watching her. What? Just remembering. Remembering what? The night you walked in expecting to find something broken, he'd say, and found something that was simply waiting to be seen. She'd cross to him, set her work aside, settle beside him in the firelight. He'd close his hand over hers. A man who'd been given something he'd stopped believing in, still not finished being grateful for it. We found each other, she'd say. Yes, he'd agree. We did. They said the alpha was broken. They said Mara was being sacrificed. Some bonds can't be managed into extinction. They wait, patient as wolves, stubborn as truth, for someone brave enough to see them through. That's Mara's story. From the woman Cain tried to discard, to the mate who chose her own destiny and changed everything in the choosing. If this one stayed with you, hit like, subscribe for more stories of love, survival, and people who refuse to disappear quietly, and tell me where you're watching from. Until next time, you were never the sacrifice. You were always the solution.